are going to begin this presentation with an exercise in listening. So please go and get a piece of paper and a pen and be ready for the questions. Number your paper from 1 to 10. Listen carefully to all the instructions before continuing to write anything. Print your name in the upper right-hand corner of your paper. Draw 5 small squares in the top left-hand corner of your paper. Draw a circle around your name at the top of the page. In the right margin of your paper, multiply 66 by 7. Put an X in the lower right-hand corner of your paper. In the left margin of your paper, add 169 and 842. If you think you've followed all the instructions, say yes out loud. Now, what was the second instruction? You may remember, listen carefully to all instructions before continuing to write anything. Did you? You didn't have to worry about all those questions after all. Did you know that 70% of communication time, things like meetings, phone calls, any interpersonal communication, we spend in listening? And yet, we put less time into training people to listen than to teach them how to speak or read or write. Imagine yourself giving a presentation to an audience that was busy finishing their homework or falling asleep or looking out the window and around the room. And then imagine yourself giving a presentation to an audience that is alert and actively listening to you. Which audience would you prefer? Modern research shows us that most people actually only listen with about 25% efficiency. Now, why is that? It's because people think that listening is a passive activity. They think it's up to the speaker to maintain communication. What we're going to discuss today is that active listening is a dynamic activity that can be learned. Most of us, you see, are so busy trying to get our own idea across that we don't really listen actively to the other person's ideas. But listening actively can make you a better speaker, a more productive person, more interesting and effective with your job and in your personal relationships. The same son I told you about before, who was afraid of heights, our Nick, he makes friends very easily. And why is that? Well, people think that Nick is very interesting to listen to. But in actual fact, Nick himself believes that he's failing if he's telling people too much about himself. And he much prefers to draw people out and ask them questions about themselves. People come away from a conversation with Nick thinking, what an interesting guy he is, not realizing that they find him interesting because he allows them to talk about themselves. In fact, he draws them out and makes them talk about themselves. See the slide here. The Chinese symbol to listen. Now this is very interesting. I don't know if any of you are Chinese, but I found it very interesting to find out what constitutes this Chinese symbol that means to listen. Now we're going to talk now about the difference between listening and hearing. Let's look at the listening ladder. Hearing is an automatic process. It's something that just happens, as you know, when sound waves travel through the air, stimulate the nerves in the ear, and send a message to the brain. Now that's the component of listening that the Chinese symbol has in it for ears. But listening is a whole lot more than that. Listening is a voluntary activity. It's something you have to decide to do. It isn't an automatic thing like those sound waves stimulating the nerve impulses. It goes beyond the physical reaction to sound. So it also involves the eyes. You listen also with your eyes. Listening involves receiving the message, and therefore it needs our undivided attention. We need, as listeners, as good listeners, to focus on the message and to block out any distractions. There's a wonderful story about Franklin D. Roosevelt, who went through the White House one morning, and everybody he encountered, he said to them, "Good morning, I murdered my grandmother this morning." And everybody he met said, "Oh, thank you," or "How good of you," or "Good morning, Mr. President." Until finally, after some time, he met another person to whom he also said, "Good morning, I murdered my grandmother this morning." And that person replied, "I'm sure she had it coming to her." He was testing to see who was actually actively listening, and he found one such person. When we listen actively, it's not only about receiving the message, but having done so, organising that message so that we understand not only the speaker's verbal language, but also their non-verbal language. Active listening also involves interpreting what the speaker is saying based on your own knowledge and your own experience. In responding as active listeners, we need to be empathetic. We need to be encouraging that speaker to suspend any judgment we might make until later and just enjoy the speech, the words, the message, appreciate what the speaker is saying to us. And that part involves the heart, another component of the Chinese symbol of listening. I'd like to tell a story about Mark Hodge. Mark was a member of my very first Toastmasters club. And Mark was such a good, active listener. As a very young, inexperienced Toastmaster myself, I noticed how every time I or any other member of our club got out to speak, Mark would be sitting there actively listening. What did he do that was different from everybody else? He kept his eyes on the speaker all the time. He gave the speaker his undivided attention. Sometimes he would nod when the speaker gave a particular message or opinion or bit of information. He would smile a lot. I, as a young speaker, found it very encouraging to get up if Mark was in the room, because I knew he was really listening to me, and I felt personally encouraged by his body language as an active listener. Active listening also involves having a critical approach. This is the mind part of our Chinese symbol. We are critical in that we analyse and evaluate the content. We're evaluating all the time and giving feedback, as Mark did. And also listening involves unpacking the message of the speaker. A certain dialogue in our minds between ourselves and the speaker as we ponder how this message might be applied to our own life. However, when we are listening actively, any questions we have, we make a mental note, but we don't interrupt the speaker in our minds, and we leave those questions until later. The listening ladder is a matter of the audience plus the speaker coming together in a teamwork in order to bring about meaning. And when that partnership between audience and speaker happens, then the speech can become truly transformative. And this is what you want. Let's talk a bit more about the benefits of listening well. Pause and think about some situations that you may have been in when active listening is important. There are benefits to listening actively. Professionally, in your job, if you want job advancement, it will be noticed if you're an active listener. If you want to gather the information and truly understand it, you need to be an active listener. If you want to be able to follow directions, yes, you need to listen actively. Active listening is necessary for contracts and agreements to fully understand what is meant. Problem solving through discussion. Jury duty. Let's hope that the jury who is on when you are presenting your case in court is comprised of truly active listeners. Following instructions requires active listening. Not only in our professional life, but in our personal life also. We can avoid gullibility in false advertising if we actively listen to what's being really said. Anybody coming to the complaints department would be much more satisfied if they bring their complaints forward to somebody who they perceive is actively listening to their complaint. And we could miss significant information in our personal relationships if we are not listening actively. Because active listening is a way we can show respect in our relationships with other people. Plan making, avoiding missing information in class. There are so many ways that listening actively in our personal lives puts us at an advantage. In this course, we will be learning from critical evaluation of each other's seminars. But in order to do that, we first need to learn to listen actively. The speaker too benefits when active listening is going on, because as I mentioned before with my friend Mark, an audience listening actively will add to the confidence of the speaker. Earlier, we mentioned how the most important skills sought by employers were oral and written communication skills. I can tell you now that the most important problem in the workforce is to do with poor listening skills, because that leads to ineffective performance and low productivity. And that is why the Fortune 500 corporations engage in training programs to teach their staff how to listen well. Going on now, let's talk about some of the barriers to listening well. What are some of the things that stop us from active listening? We could group this into external interference problems and internal interference problems. We'll talk about the external ones first. Environmental issues, for example, white noise. If there's a machine in the room or an air conditioner perhaps that's making noise in the background, that might make it difficult for you to listen. And knowing that means that you can do something about it. Or perhaps there's noise coming in from outside. Maybe you just need to go and close the window. The temperature is another environmental thing that can prevent us from listening well. If it's too hot or too cold, then we need to adjust the temperature. And access to the speaker. If you're sitting down the back and can't hear properly, move and come sit closer to the front. Or let the speaker know that he or she needs to speak a little louder or use a microphone. Another external barrier could be the message itself. If the speaker's message is full of jargon and you don't really understand the message, what can you do about it if you're going to be an active listener? I suggest that if there's jargon or unfamiliar words likely to be in a presentation, you could prepare by perhaps reading up a little bit more about the topic that you're about to listen to. Perhaps you could read a book that the speaker has written, and then you'll have a better idea with some pre-reading about the meaning of some of the words that would be difficult to understand. If the speaker is poorly organised, what can you do as a listener to listen better? Well, you could take notes, but jot down the main points, and then later on you can go back over that and see if you can make some sense of the message that you've just heard. Sometimes the presentation and the way it's presented could be a barrier, an external barrier to your active listening. If the presenter uses distracting body language, which we have mentioned before and will be talking about more in the future, or uses lack of vocal variety and speaks on a monotone, or perhaps the speaker speaks too slowly or too fast, too quietly, or maybe they speak actually so loudly that you find you're getting a headache or it's a bit of a drone for you. All of these things can prevent you from being able to listen as well as you should. The speaker's dress or hairstyle could even be a problem. What do? Just be aware of these things as a listener and try to focus on the message. I can tell you a story where I had a difficulty when I was still in high school. We used to have a drama teacher, and this lady was actually, well, quite large. But she was sensible. She knew that by wearing vertical stripes, she could look a little better. And that's what she did. But there was one particular dress that I found made it very difficult for me to listen into her message, and that was the one with the green and red close together stripes. My eyes just wobbled. I could not properly focus on this lady, and certainly her attire was very distracting to me, and I had to try not to look at her dress, but just to focus on her face, or look perhaps just to the side of her. All of these are external interference problems for our active listening. We'll talk now about internal interference problems. Personal things, personal concerns like being tired or hungry or worried or angry. If these things are going inside you, you need to put them aside and decide to worry later. Another internal problem could be your judgment of the speaker or the speaker's topic based on their delivery rather than the speech content itself. Or mentally interrupting the speaker, questioning a statistic they might have just presented, or arguing a point and disagreeing in your mind. If you spend too much time on that rather than just jotting it down and letting it go, you could actually miss the rest of the speaker's message, which might be worth listening to. Allowing your personal bias and prejudice of the speaker and their message will make you filter out some of the message and only hear one side of what the speaker is saying to you. If you assimilate what the speaker is saying to your own beliefs, you will hear only what you want to hear, and that's not good active listening. If you exaggerate in your mind the differences between yourself and the speaker's message, that will also prevent truly receiving the message. There may be trigger words that the speaker uses. For example, if I'm conducting a choir with young people and I want to talk about breathing, I would avoid the word diaphragm, because that could be a trigger word that might help them think of something completely different from what I'm actually talking about. If you are blind to the message because of your response to certain trigger words like perhaps freedom or democracy, progress, and that sends you on a tangent thinking, then that's not active listening. And people who think they already know everything that the speaker has to say also will prevent themselves from listening actively. Perhaps admit that there might be something extra the speaker has to tell you and decide to be objective and perhaps find value in listening and looking for something positive in the speaker's message. In this day and age, we have developed some very bad habits, already beginning with television. TV and so much of our multimedia experiences are fast and entertaining. We can speak 125 words a minute, but we can actually process information 500 words per minute. And so if things aren't going as fast as we used to, as listeners, we often tend to drift away. Sometimes as listeners, we pretend to be attentive when really we're not. We might be showing active attention, but in our minds, they might be far away thinking of something completely else. There are some students for whom fear of failure in their studies prevents them from listening actively. If I don't really listen, then how can I have heard the message? How can I be expected to do well in my tests? And so it's a good excuse to fail. There are actually people who think that way. Not you, of course. Another bad habit some of us have is to listen just for the facts. The first year students usually do this. A lecturer comes into the auditorium, first year students get out their pen and try to write everything down. The second year students know better. They jot down just the main ideas. And if you're too busy writing everything down, you might just miss all the body nuances. And what happens to the third year students? Well, I'd rather not say. The solutions to these bad habits are to listen to the main ideas, and by all means jot them down, just the main points. And in your mind, perhaps when you go back to your notes, paraphrase the overall message, or even at the end of the presentation. In yourself, if you can paraphrase the overall message, you're showing that you've been actively listening, especially if when you are listening, you're aiming to do that at the end. And also, do attend to the non-verbal cues. There are so many things that a presenter communicates with their body and their stance beyond just the words that they're speaking. Now, given all of that, how can we improve our listening skills? Well, like Mark Hodge, number one, act like a good listener. Sometimes when you act like a good listener, it helps you, once your body is doing those things, to bring your mind in and tune in and truly listen actively. Show you're interested. Use your body language. Do those nods. Take notes. Encourage the speaker to speak well with your responses, perhaps even your comments if it's appropriate to do so. And show respect even if you disagree with the message the speaker is giving you. Secondly, to be a good listener, we need to ignore all those distractions that we've already discussed. Remember, active listening involves organising and interpreting what you hear. Secondly, it involves communicating a willingness to listen, to be a non-threatening audience, to understand the speaker's point of view, and to offer feedback positively. Thirdly, active listening is based on genuine respect for the other person's opinion. And lastly, it prevents communication breakdown. It stimulates communication and reduces hostility and promotes self-confidence and understanding. Once we have learned to listen effectively, we are in a position to give an effective evaluation of a speech. What is a speech evaluation? Effective speech evaluation is one of the most important learning tools in this part of the course. It is a personal appraisal of a performance where you give your own opinion of how the speaker did. And it's delivered in an honest, yet tactful and positive manner. It provides immediate feedback to the speaker and becomes a learning opportunity for the evaluator and the audience, as well as the speaker himself or herself. There are two aspects to a good evaluation. There's the person who evaluates, and, of course, the person being evaluated. Effective evaluation is of benefit to you as a speaker, to you as an evaluator, and to you as a member of the audience. As an evaluator, you will develop analytical thinking skills, effective listening skills, and the ability to express your opinion concisely and constructively in an impromptu speech of your own. How then do we evaluate? You'll find the guidelines for this following section in the Active Listening and Evaluating section of Module 4. But for the speaker, please use the short speech evaluation form that you'll find at the end of Module 4 Overview, and hand that to the speaker that you evaluate. Well, let's now look at how we evaluate. First of all, you look at the speaker's commitment. Was the speaker's passion about their topic obvious to you? And did the speaker seem prepared? Had they done the work? Did the speech seem to have structure to it? And was there some research, obviously, that had been gone into? Then look at the content itself, the substance of the speech. Was the speech's purpose clearly defined? In other words, could you tell if the speech's purpose was to inform the audience, or to persuade the audience, or to inspire the audience, or to entertain the audience? This needs to be clear to you. Was the speech well supported by research? And did the speaker use facts, testimonials, examples, and narratives to make the material of the speech clear to the audience? Was the structure clear? Do you think there was a strong, arousing introduction? You could begin by giving an example of the particular thing that the speech was going to be about, or a quote, or a question, asking the audience a question, or some arresting fact, something that is strong that draws the attention of the audience immediately to the speaker. Following the introduction, was there a logically flowing body, the main part of the speech? In other words, could you see that there was an orderly progression of main ideas, each with supporting material? And then finally, was there a memorable conclusion where the speaker summarised the main points and gave the audience some kind of take-home message in a way that they are never going to forget? And did the use of facts, props and visual aids, etc., enhance or detract from the message of the speech? Next, we look at the language. Were sentences used that were simple and direct, or were they complicated and difficult for the audience to follow? Did the speaker use word pictures, concrete ideas that appeal to the senses of sight and smell and touch, maybe even taste? Was the language used compatible with this particular audience and with this particular speech? Did this language clarify or confuse? Did the speaker use correct grammar and pronunciation? And was there use of slang or jargon? Next, look at the delivery of the speech. Look at the body language of the speaker. Consider their appearance. Did they look professional and neat, or sloppy, as if they just walked in from doing the chores out in the garden? What about their gestures? Were the gestures natural, or were they distracting to the audience? And eye contact. Did the speaker hold the audience with the way they connected with each person with their eyes? The speaker's voice. Did it vary in volume, and vary in tone, and vary in pace or speed? Was the voice used in a way that welcomed the audience to listen to this presentation? Was the speech delivered with prepared notes? Not a written script where every word had to be read out, but just some notes that would give the speaker a little prompt into the next bit. And it didn't need to be memorised either. Why do we evaluate? How does evaluation help us? Well, effective speech evaluation benefits us by providing immediate feedback to the speaker, as we've already said, And in it, we emphasise the speaker's strong points, which reinforces their speaking skills, and then makes recommendations for improvement, not critical comments, but helpful suggestions in which they could improve and become an even better speaker than before. An evaluation will help us by building and maintaining self-esteem. In it, we give honest and sincere praise from the evaluator to make the speaker feel that they were doing something right, and with some improvement, they could be even better. As an evaluator, your prime objective is to help the speaker. You base your evaluation on what you saw, what you heard, and what you felt. How did the speech affect you? Personalise your language. You are, after all, expressing your own opinion. There are two key features to every evaluation. There's the commendation and the recommendation. In this course, we are using the Toastmasters International formula, sometimes called the sandwich approach. Commend, recommend, commend. Commendations are where we say what we thought were the positive aspects of the speech. Recommendations are suggestions for improvement. And we always end with a final commendation for the speaker, because that's an encouragement for them to challenge themselves again. For each one, regardless of what you are evaluating, whether it's a short speech or an impromptu session or a seminar or prepared speech, you ask the following questions. What, how, and why is this important? For example, you might give a commendation for a speech where you're saying what the speaker did well, and say, right, this is what was done, this is what was done effectively. The speaker maintained good eye contact. Now, how did the speaker do this? The speaker looked around the room at all the different people in the audience and established eye contact with individuals. Why is that an important thing for the speech? Because the audience then felt included in the speech and was able to respond effectively and positively for the speaker. Then we give a recommendation. This is when we say what could be even better. What area could be improved upon? Maybe I would say the speaker had a rising inflection at the end of the sentences. They sounded like they were going up at the end of everything they said. And how could the speaker improve? Well, they might ask a friend to make them aware every time that they do this. And why is this important for a speech anyway? If you go up at the end of every sentence that you say, you sound as if you're asking a question instead of making a statement. And then the people you are speaking to aren't sure if you are really sure about what it is that you're saying. So asking unintended questions in a speech decreases your credibility as an expert in your field of research. When you are receiving an evaluation, so now you're the speaker and you are receiving evaluation from your peers. Again, you'll find these tips in Module 4, Active Listening and Evaluating. Never look upon an evaluation as a criticism, but it's a catalyst for change, a little bit like the moral of the story in Aesop's fairy tales. To benefit from your evaluation, remember, you do need to know how to improve, and without an evaluation you wouldn't know. So take all the comments seriously, and in fact ask your evaluator, if necessary, for specifics. If the evaluation you've received is vague, ask them for more feedback. If there's any undue criticism coming your way, just learn to deflect that and respond in a way that is not defensive. Perhaps you might say, well, what you said sort of makes sense, but... And this is your response that you have in your mind. Because we don't expect the evaluator to defend their comments. We don't engage in a conversation about this afterwards. we just accept what the evaluator said, take it on board, and then sift through it ourselves. Take an objective view of your performance. What are you trying to do in your speech? Were you trying to inform or entertain or persuade your audience? Did you really meet your objectives through your speech delivery? As an evaluator, there are some traps to avoid. And the first one is the whitewash. The whitewash is a cop-out. It's typified by poor analysis, ineffectual praise and non-existent or vague recommendations. If an evaluation gives only commendations and no recommendation, it's a whitewash. And it's often caused by the evaluator's own lack of self-esteem. As a member of the audience, you, as an evaluator, your reaction and your opinion are important and worthwhile. The second trap to avoid is the rehash. The rehash merely reiterates what the speaker said and maybe agrees or disagrees. And there's little comment on the presentation itself or the techniques of the presentation. In the rehash, there are no recommendations to help the speaker improve. The evaluator's personal opinions and beliefs, they're not at issue here. That's not an important thing. The third trap to avoid is the critic. This is opposite to the whitewash. The critic gives outright criticism. For example, might say something like, "Good speakers don't move around so much when they speak." That's a critical remark. We avoid that. Or commendations negated by attaching a weakness. For example, "The speech was good, but you had too much information." When you're giving a commendation, avoid the word but. But negates the commendation. The critic doesn't offer any suggestions on how, when, or why to make any improvements. In fact, the critic destroys the speaker's sense of self-confidence. There is no benefit at all to the speaker or to the evaluator or to the audience when the critic gets up to evaluate. Effective speech evaluation is one of the most important learning tools of a speaker. It helps you to listen effectively, to practice your own speaking skills, to help others improve, and to avoid the fear of feedback in your own presentations. Now, in the coming weeks, we will have many opportunities to all learn from each other by active listening for giving and receiving the most effective speech evaluations we can, both for prepared speeches and impromptu speeches. At the end of this presentation, I ask you to review today's material in the Blackboard site so that you can be prepared to evaluate, to motivate when you review 2 or more of your peers' presentations.